It is at some level seen as part of the government's ongoing efforts. Of course, the opposition, different, very diverse, otherwise, people who can't get to the same table, have actually come around to supporting President Vikramasinghe and saying that this arrest amounts to political revenge, and they've called it an assault on democracy and so on.
What exactly are the charges against Mr. Vikramasinghe, and why is it so significant that a former head of state is facing arrest in Sri Lanka for the first time?
So there is, commentary from Tamil saying, okay, this case, this arrest is fine, but will they actually pursue people who are accused of serious war crimes? Will they have the, political resolve, the conviction to do that? Will they take that through? Those are the questions that remain from Tamils also.
In the past few years, Sri Lanka has seen extraordinary upheaval. An economic collapse that left people standing in fuel queues, protesters storming the presidential palace, and the fall of the powerful Rajapaksa family. Out of that turmoil came Ranil Vikramasinghe, a veteran politician who took charge in 2022 as the president, struck a deal with the International Monetary Fund, and brought some stability. But he was also criticized for imposing austerity and for protecting the corrupt political dynasty of the Rajapakshas, representing the old political elite. Now, in a historic first, Vikramasinghe has been arrested, accused of misusing public funds for a trip to a UK university to attend his wife's graduation ceremony. At the center of this moment is Anura Kumara Dissanayake, Sri Lanka's president since 2024. The son of a farmer, once a Marxist firebrand, he now leads a government that has promised to break with the past. So what does Vikramasinghe's arrest and his subsequent bail mean for Sri Lanka's fragile democracy, its economy, and its place in a region where India and China are watching very, very closely? With me today is Meera Srinivasan, the Hindu's correspondent in Colombo. And she is the best person to answer a lot of these questions we have about what's going on in this teardrop-shaped island next to South India. Welcome, Meera.
Thank you, Anupama.
Meera, Sri Lanka has been through protests and economic collapse, and now the arrest of a former president. For someone listening from the outside, how do we make sense of what's been happening in this country these past few years?
Well, you're right in saying that there has been, a series of shifts in Sri Lanka's political landscape and economy as well. So this arrest has to be seen as part of the current government, the Anura Kumara Dissanayake government's ongoing crackdown on corruption, which really was their main poll plank last year as he campaigned for presidency. So he, as you remember, campaigned on the heels of this mass uprising of people that ousted the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. And the central plank of his campaign was that he will wipe out corruption in this country. So it has been nearly a year since he rose to presidency. The presidential elections were held in September last year, and it's going to be a year. And his government subsequently won a massive parliamentary majority in November 2024. So they have a few more months to complete a year. And the thrust of their governance in these 10 or 12 months has been that, they will take action on corrupt officials and politicians. And they have arrested close to a dozen people in the last many months, including former ministers, one nephew of Mahinda Rajapaksa, a senior police official, different, public officials and politicians have had to face arrest. And the arrest of former President Ranil Vikramasinghe on August 22nd, last Friday, was really the first time that a former head of state has faced arrest. And he's, of course, a very prominent politician in Sri Lanka and very well known in the region and beyond. So there's a lot of attention being paid to the arrest and his subsequent bail yesterday. It is at some level seen as part of the government's ongoing efforts. Of course, the opposition, different, very diverse, otherwise, people who can't get to the same table have actually come around to supporting President Vikramasinghe and saying that this arrest amounts to political revenge, and they've called it an assault on democracy and so on. So there's a lot of attention on the arrest and the developments around that itself and the responses of the opposition. But for the government, this has been, one of its actions against, one of its promised actions against corruption. And that's how they are, giving out messages right from the president, who addressed a gathering of monks yesterday, to senior ministers. They have been maintaining that everybody is equal before law. So as if to say that, so why is everybody reacting when it's a former president who's arrested this time, has been the government's response. So that's where we are.
Now, Ranil Wickremesinghe himself, he's been in politics for decades, right? I mean, some see him as this man who steadied the economy. Others kind of say that he's been too close to the Rajapaksas. Who was he really, and why does his legacy divide opinion?
That's a really interesting question, Anupama, because as you know, he's one of the senior most politicians in Sri Lanka. And he entered parliament in 1977 in his late 20s. And he was in parliament until he lost elections in 2020. So that's nearly half a century, right? And that kind of long presence in parliament. And of course, he's also been leading the United National Party, one of Sri Lanka's oldest parties, which was earlier led by his uncle J.R. Jayawardena, controversial president of Sri Lanka. So in that sense, he's a very prominent figure. And
he's also a lawyer, right?
Trained in the law. He's a lawyer, but he's also extremely interested in international relations, geopolitics, and often, gave insights or commentary on global developments from a Sri Lankan perspective. So that's where he comes from. He comes from Colombo's elite society, went to a very prominent school, politically very well-known family. And that's really his background, and leads a center-right party, which, during his uncle's time, opened up Sri Lanka's economy and introduced open economic reforms in the late 70s. So that's really the legacy of the party and the leader. Why the legacy might be divided is that, the latter part of Mr. Wickremesinghe's career, he's been 6-time prime minister. Of course, he wasn't able to complete a full term in any instance, but nevertheless, premier for 6 times. And then I think this association with the Rajapaksas, or allegations of that proximity, began in the time that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was in power. So that coincides with the Aragalaya, the people's struggle here. And at one point in May 2022, then Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa is forced to resign after a bout of violence by his supporters targeting the protesters. And then Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was president, appoints Mr. Wickremesinghe as his prime minister. So from that point onwards, it is seen, people who think or accuse Mr. Wickremesinghe of being very, close to the Rajapaksas, see that appointment itself as an indication of that proximity. Further, when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is eventually ousted in July 2022, he flees the country, and there's an urgent requirement for a president in Sri Lanka. So all the other contenders did not want to take presidency unconditionally. They said they would help the country, but only if certain conditions were met and certain promises were made. But Mr. Rajapaksa was not agreeable, and then eventually Mr. Wickremesinghe is elected not in an election, popular election, but through an urgent parliamentary vote, which is extraordinary. And much of his support in that parliamentary vote came from Rajapaksa's party and backers. So his rise to presidency itself is seen as something that was enabled by the Rajapaksas, and which is when, these two rival camps, people started collapsing that and saying, these represent, the same political camp in effect. So that is also why, at some level, he's criticized for taking that position. But at the same time, there are many who think that he was willing to take the risk. He was willing to, lead the country at a time when it needed leadership very urgently, and he sought the International Monetary Fund's assistance, got the program. Of course, even those decisions and policy shifts have been scrutinized, and there are people who think that it was inevitable and he did what needed to be done, and others who think that he didn't negotiate hard enough with the IMF and took on a lot of burden, which was eventually passed on to ordinary Sri Lankans. So there is mixed legacy, as you say.
I remember the scenes from Colombo and the rest of Sri Lanka during this time, and it was quite shocking to see everything that was happening in terms of, and also interesting to see how people were actually rising up to protest against this, right? What exactly are the charges against Mr. Wickremesinghe, and why is it so significant that a former head of state is facing arrest in Sri Lanka for the first time?
Sure. Mr. Wickremesinghe was arrested under the Offences Against Public Property Act of 1982, Sri Lankan law, and also under penal code sections that pertain to dishonest misappropriation and criminal breach of trust. So this is basically, we're talking about a law that makes this offense an unbailable one unless the circumstances are exceptional. And in terms of the charges itself, I'd like to refer to a comment made by a prominent opposition parliamentarian called Mano Ganesan. He was challenging the government. He, of course, condemned the arrest and said this is not how it ought to have been done. But he said the government said they would take action against Mr. Wickremesinghe for past allegations, including overseeing a torture camp in a place called Bathalanda.
Yes.
Also for a large...
That was a big deal, right? I think there were many articles about that.
Right.
Many people, that was a quite big deal. Yeah.
And also during his time as premier, during the good governance period, Yahapalnya government, as it's called here, between 2015 and 19, there was a very big financial scam in the central bank that he's linked to and accused of enabling. So Mr. Ganesan, this opposition parliamentarian, said, why can't the government prove those very serious allegations as they promised they would? And why have they instead, chosen to pursue this case, under what many are calling trivial charges? But that again is a point of debate. Whether it's trivial or not depends on which side of 16 million you are in Sri Lanka.
Right. Now, the new president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, who's actually kind of taking these measures, he is from a very different background, right? How does his rise from farmer's son to president change the way politics looks and feels in Sri Lanka, since you've actually kind of gone through this whole process, right, of seeing that transition, that change?
Yeah, I think it's in some ways, what political scientists have called a tectonic shift in Sri Lanka's political landscape.
Wow.
And the reason for that is, for all these years since independence in 1948, Sri Lanka has had one of the two major parties govern, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party or its, later versions, or the United National Party, alternating in power. So this is the first time that a third front, which has nothing to do with these two legacy parties, national parties, has actually made it to power. And in fact, a party with revolutionary aspirations in its early avatar, right? The JVP, which is the chief constituent of the current National People's Power coalition, has led two insurrections in the past, in the late 70s and then in the late 80s. The party itself has had several changes along the way. The first insurrection was more for social and economic justice against the ruling elite. The second insurrection took a decidedly Sinhala nationalist turn. So the party itself has seen several changes along the way, and this latest incarnation in this coalition is really JVP recasting itself, trying to appeal to a wider section in society, and that is how they rose to power. And very significantly, their rise coincided with, but also was significantly enabled by the people's movement here, the Aragalya, as you said, because The citizens' uprising in 2022 was really, it was of course protesting against the queues for fuel and gas and all that, the lack of electricity and so on. But it was also this referendum against the old political class, in a sense, saying we don't want any of you. That's the message that citizens gave out. And that created a sort of political vacuum, which the NPP, with very steady campaigning, which started pre-Aragalaya, but it was able to build on that momentum, was able to capture people's imagination and then sort of translate that to electoral victory. And President Dissanayaka's own rise, I mean, he's been leading the JVP for the last decade, but he's also been a very steady sort of voice in parliament. Even when he was in opposition, many people took note of his interventions, especially pushing for democracy, pushing for the need to uphold the constitution and so on over the last many years. So in that sense, it is a very significant shift. It is a break away from Sri Lanka's political trajectory until 2022. And that is why even this arrest is seen in that context. And some people are sort of casting it as, the old political class and the new government sort of going after the old political class. But the government is, of course, maintaining that this is part of their action on corruption.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking earlier about the reason for the arrest, right? And why the reason has been this one, which is about, using government funds to go and attend an event in the UK and not for other bigger offenses. What do you see as the reason for this? Why haven't they picked up on the other bigger offenses, like you mentioned, the camps where people were tortured and things like that?
Well, the Parliament did debate the Batalanda Commission report and said that it would look into it. The government has not stated any specific reason for the chronology of cases, right? But what we pick up from investigators, from government officials, is that they are pursuing multiple cases. They are investigating multiple past crimes. And it is only when there is sufficient evidence that they're able to produce in a court of law that they're able to actually initiate legal action, is the explanation that we hear. So which is why this arrest also puts a lot of pressure on this government, because the expectations are that they will, go after every controversial case of the past, of abductions, of murder, of abduction of journalists, murder of journalists, of other very controversial cases where even the military is accused of murdering Tamils and so on. So there are these very controversial, sensitive cases which are often called emblematic cases, in a sense, emblematic of the nature of human rights violations that went on through the period of war in Sri Lanka, which also get frequent international attention in the Human Rights Council and from rights watchdogs. So the pressure on this government is really that will they pursue all these cases rigorously and thoroughly and be able to produce enough evidence so there can be legal action initiated, indictments filed, and so on. So the expectation that this government has set for itself is very high. In fact, that's what President Dissanayaka told us in one of his interviews just before he got elected president. He said the biggest challenge we will have, should we win, is the expectation we have set. We've set it so high that we'll have to work really hard, and we have to see if they're able to actually meet those expectations.
Yeah, this is actually quite phenomenal when you actually put it that way, right? That they are kind of pursuing, like you said, very serious and hopefully in the future be pursuing very serious human right violation cases. And to ordinary Sri Lankans, who actually were part of the struggle, does this arrest feel like it was long due, that it is like a long awaited accountability? Or do you think that there could be a precedent set over here, related to political revenge and things like that? So what are you hearing from on the ground? And I know you said previously that the opinion is kind of divided, but if you're looking at people who elected this government into power, what are you sensing? Do they feel that finally there is some accountability that is coming through.
That is definitely a prominent sentiment from among those who support this government, many of whom, of course, elected them to power. But again, it's hard to generalize because this is not exhaustive. And uh, Ranil Wickremesinghe, as a leader from a legacy party, a party that still has some sort of support base, although electorally they haven't been doing well. Uh, Sometimes people are also wondering if this could be political revenge. And I'm going by social media commentary in some cases, which some commentators have also pointed to. But in a general sense, I think many of the government's backers, if you see what they are saying, it seems like, they feel, um, this ought to be done and they are doing what needs to be done. That sort of sentiment is also there. But again, it depends. Now, the Tamils, if you take the Tamils, for instance, there's still a lot of skepticism. So there is, commentary from Tamil saying, okay, this case, this arrest is fine, but will they actually pursue people who are accused of serious war crimes? Will they have the, political resolve, the conviction to do that? Will they take that through? Those are the questions that remain from Tamils also. So in a sense,
And has Dissanayake made any comments about that? Because this is obviously something that had kept Sri Lanka in the headlines for so many years. It's something that is also an issue that, India deals with refugee camps and things like that. The civil, the violence that happened over there in Sri Lanka between the Tamils and the Sinhalese, that is obviously like a very important issue. And what are you sensing? Has Dissanayake actually indicated anything to that effect to assuage, the Tamils in the country?
So, President Dissanayaka's party did very well in the general election in the north and east where Tamils live. So, that was, after his presidential election, at which time Tamils mostly voted for Sajith Premadasa, the leader of opposition. But we saw a switch in the 2 months leading up to the general election. And he has been promising the Tamils that, past issues will be looked into with sincerity. He's been saying that. And, one of the promise.
That's a big deal, right?
But Tamils have heard that before, Anupama, really. Like, even when President Sirisena and Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe were together in government, they promised to look into several past cases. They said, many of these wartime issues will be resolved. They even co-sponsored a resolution with the Human Rights Council committing to several of these steps. But the Tamils feel that substantial progress was not made. So they are not waiting with bated breath for action. They are waiting with a lot more skepticism, and understandably so, because of their past experience with promises. But in a sense, President Dissanayake, for instance, has said military-held land will be returned to people and it rightfully belongs to the Tamil people. And his government has initiated the return of some land. Of course, there are delays and a lot of administrative blocks to these processes, but he has said that. And very significantly in May, when Sri Lanka marks the anniversary of the Civil War every year, and in the South, we should understand that soldiers are considered war heroes by the Sinhalese majority because they defeated terrorism and so on. And, it's a very sort of diametrically opposite relationship with the military as an institution. But addressing a gathering of soldiers, President Dissanayake said, grief is common to everybody. Grief knows no ethnicity. And he referred to mothers of disappeared people in the north and said, look, they are looking for their loved ones just as we look for ours. And in a sense, that speech drew a lot of attention, including from the human rights chief when he visited some time ago. And it was considered to be a lot more conciliatory and trying to make a point in the Sinhalese majority South in a forum of soldiers that, grief is common. So there is reason for hope, but there's more reason for skepticism because of the history of this country and experience of Tamils with different governments.
It is always so complicated, right? When there has been so much of division within a country, and then for somebody to come to power and actually win back confidence, of course, action should speak louder than words. And of course, that skepticism is kind of in the right spirit. if you're looking at India and China, who are two countries that are closely connected with Sri Lanka, what happens inside Sri Lanka really does matter a lot to its bigger neighbors. What do you see happening here with this arrest of and of course the bail of Vikramasinghe? How do you think that is actually shaking things up geopolitically for Sri Lanka?
I'm not sure that the arrest itself has geopolitical ramifications as yet.
But wasn't Vikramasinghe seen as somebody who is closer to India? But yeah, correct me if
I mean, at one point, I think there were perceptions about different leaders as being pro-India or pro-China. But realistically, all leaders in Sri Lanka have sort of pursued both these relationships in different degrees of perhaps intimacy. But there has been no leader, I think, who has historically said, no, we don't need one or the other. Maybe they've balanced these two powers very differently. At some point, it was considered that Mr. Vikramasinghe was a more pro-West, pro-India leader at some time. That was the perception. But I think that perception also changed with time, because as he held the country, he was, pursuing both India and China in different ways, different projects, investments, and so on, as any leader in the region would, right? I mean, they have to work with different big partners. But the arrest itself, I don't think has geopolitical ramifications as yet. We have not had any government reaction from India. Of course, some opposition voices, but not really, yet drawing that kind of a response from other countries in a sense, other than individuals. And the other thing is that President Dissanayaka has made state visits to both India and China after he was elected president. And of course, Prime Minister Modi was in Sri Lanka earlier this year. And repeatedly, President Dissanayaka has said that his government would pursue a non-aligned foreign policy and that all powers are important. And he's also repeatedly reassured India that Sri Lankan soil or territory will not be used by any force in a manner that threatens India's security interests. So I think that mutual understanding has been demonstrated in various public statements by leaders of all these countries. Of course, both India and China are very keen to engage in the economic and developmental sphere. There's a lot of engagement with investment, and both countries also have a lot of bilateral debt to figure out and settle as part of their debt restructuring program. So the engagement continues, and I would think that at the moment, India has indicated in multiple statements that they are going to work very closely with this government.
That's interesting. Sri Lanka's economy is still fragile, right? The recent tariffs from the Trump government is definitely going to affect industries such as the garments industry in Sri Lanka. Does this moment give a chance, give the country a chance at reform, given what Dissanayake is doing? Is it likely to give it more stability? Or is there a danger that old cycles of corruption and crisis may return?
So, yeah, very important question, and one of the biggest challenges in my view for this government, because this relative stability that, is spoken about after the IMF program began is really something that you see at the fiscal level, right? The numbers begin to look better. But we should also remember that Sri Lanka has suspended debt repayment because of the default in 2022. And it's in 2028 that they start repaying their external debt to different actors.
So you're saying they have a little bit of time to manage their
But at the same time, the IMF program also gives very stringent conditions, and basically Sri Lanka has to run its economy exactly according to that prescription, right? Which means that it's extremely painful for ordinary people, and how the government might be able to address their enduring cost of living crisis, wage crisis, stagnant income crisis, and you see at some level the public education system, public health system really losing its strength. I mean, Sri Lanka, somewhat like Kerala in India, was known for its human development indicators because of this very robust public health and education system. And you talked about garment workers. Yes, I mean, Sri Lanka's economy is still run by its workers, garment workers who export garments, then tea estate workers, again for export, and then worker remittances coming in largely from West Asia. Sri Lanka is still sustaining its economy because of the labor of these people, largely women, the workforce. And there is nothing, or at least so far, I mean, there's a talk of removing corruption, but I don't know if, you have the same economic plan and scheme and just remove corruption out of it, whether that's going to be enough to reshape your entire economy is a big question, because nothing has fundamentally changed structurally speaking. So it's the same thing without corruption, well, which is very important and very important for Sri Lankans too. But I don't know if this government is yet thinking of really, reworking its entire economic plan and how it's going to work out, its export, its imports, the heavy import reliance that continues. So it has many things to figure out. And as long as the IMF program is continuing, it's very hard to make those drastic shifts. You have to stick to that script. And once the IMF program is over, Sri Lanka has to get back to repaying the debt. So it's very, very challenging, and it's not going to be easy for this government.
Right. I think it's very interesting times in South Asia for a variety of different reasons, even whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it's Bangladesh. I think it's interesting to see the kind of leaders that are coming up in our neighborhood. And also, I think these moves towards kind of figuring out how these new leaders are going to be responding to legacy politicians and the corruption that probably they engaged in previously is something that's definitely going to be of interest in the subcontinent. So I look forward to hearing more from you and look forward to talking to you again as things develop in Sri Lanka. Thank you for your time.
Sure, Anupama. Pleasure joining you.